Are you learning about CSS Basics for Beginners and want to know all about CSS classes and ID selectors, how to create them and where they're used in web development? If so, you're in the right place. Hi, Martin here from MDP Web Development. Today we'll be working on a project that we'll use as a reference project throughout the Web Development for Beginners playlist. Don't forget to check out the playlist from the start to get a better understanding of HTML and our reference project. It's updated each week with new videos. Be sure to stick around to the end to see how to get the project files on GitHub to use throughout this playlist. I'll link to important videos there also. There's a link in the description down below to the GitHub repository where all the source code is. Let's get started. Before we go on, be sure to watch the Visual Studio Code Editor video. It explains how to get and set up VS Code for use in the Web Development for Beginners playlist. And also watch the video on creating your first web page. I'll link to them in the description below. Here's a summary to get you started. First, create a folder on your desktop and call it Reference Project. Next, download and install Visual Studio Code Editor for your operating system from the link in the description. Open VS Code, then open this folder and create a new file called index.html. In the file content, type an exclamation mark and hit enter. This should create a new standard document for you. Open the file from the desktop folder and it should be a blank page as we have not put any content in it yet. If you get stuck, just watch these videos first. CSS Class, Element and ID selectors. They select the HTML element you wish to style. The class selector selects the element based on a class name. We can create this class name ourselves and call it anything we like. The element selector selects the elements based on the element name, such as H1 or P for paragraph. The ID selector selects the element based on its ID attribute. This is handy for when we want to style one particular thing. So here we can see an example of the CSS class selector. On the top, we have a HTML button, and the class for this button has been set to button. On the bottom, we can see then in the CSS, the class is referenced. You can see the dot, which means we're referencing a class. Dot button means reference to class button. So any element that has this class button will be styled with this class. So we can see in the CSS on the bottom, the background color is set to red. So this HTML button has the class set to button. If we had a paragraph with the class set to button, that would also be red. This is very handy for when you have one style and you want to apply to many items. So we've called this one button. You could call it something like background color 3. Then you could go into a button and say CSS class equals background color 3 and set the CSS color to red. Then you could apply that class to a paragraph. You could have a red background color paragraph. You could apply it to a H1. You could apply it to a div. You could apply it to a section or a list. And everywhere that class appears will be red. The CSS Element selector. The element selector, we can see here on the top in the HTML we have a H1, a heading 1 for Web Development Reference Project. And on the bottom we can see the CSS H1 with the color set to red. So notice there's no dot before this H1 here. This is just a simple element selector, so there's no dot. Dot is used for the class. This is handy if you want to style all elements, call a certain thing the same color. This will style all H1s red. If you have 10 H1s, they'll all be styled red. Here we can see the CSS ID selector. On the top, we have our button again, and we have the ID set to button ID. And on the bottom, we can see the CSS. Notice here the hash symbol. This denotes that we're actually referencing an ID, an element ID in HTML. The handy thing about this is specific to that one ID. So you can't repeat IDs on the one page. This is when you want to style something with a specific style, and you're not going to use it on anything else. Hi, before we move on, please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Thank you. So now we're going to open Visual Studio Code and our project and a browser window on the right to preview our project. It's going to go to our desktop and double click on Visual Studio Code. Then we're going to go to the Explorer view and open folder. And mine is on the desktop, so I'm going to go Desktop, Reference Project, select Folder. And here we can see we have our HTML file. If we open the browser view, we can see the reference project folder and the index.html file we created. Now to see the browser window on the right, if you have the live server extension installed, you'll see Go Live button down here on the bottom. And if you haven't, you just have to go out to your desktop, open the folder, and click on the index.html file. So once you've clicked on that file, we're just going to click this Go Live button here. And that'll start up a new browser server window for us. So a handy shortcut for Windows to put something on the left and right is to press the Windows key and then right or left arrow and release the Windows key. Then select the one you want on the left or right. So I'll close this panel. So another handy shortcut for Windows is the zoom key. If you press CTRL, then the plus to zoom in and negative to zoom out. So we can see here we have our Windows browser on the right. So the only difference if we had to open this manually on the desktop and click on the file is if we make changes on the left in our code editor, you would have to click refresh on the right to see it. So for this demo, we're going to set the colors again the same way they were. First we'll set them using a class, then the element, and then an ID. So if we just zoom in here, first we'll set them using a class. So we have to assign a class name to this H1 that we want to change the values of again. So if we type class, we can see vscode will autocomplete if we hit enter. So vscode is autocompleted the equal sign and the quotes. So class equals, we'll just call this for a test, my class. Now, this H1 has now been assigned the class name, my class, CSS class name. So let's go into our CSS style now. We're going to go dot my class, open curly brackets and close. Now whatever I write in here is going to reference that because this is the main class we've just assigned to the H1. So let's go ahead and assign the color to red. And we can see on the right hand side the color has changed to red. If you can't see it change, just click refresh on your browser. And now let's set the background color to green. We can see VS Code will autocomplete if we hit enter. And we type in green and hit enter. So there we have it. We've put a class name on this H1 called my class. Then in the CSS file, which is linked here in the HTML document, we have the CSS we want, the color red and the background color green. The handy thing about this is this class now can be put on any element. Let's just do that for a quick test. We go back to our page. We'll scroll down here. We can see we have the main element, the H1 we just styled. We can see this paragraph here of text. This is a web development reference project underneath. I'll just zoom in, CTRL and plus. Now we have this class, my class, set to the background color of green and the color of red. Let's just apply that class to this paragraph and see, does it actually change the colors of this paragraph? The good thing about CSS classes is you can put the class name on any HTML element and it'll apply those colors. So we type class and hit enter. We call it my class. And we can see here now, once you click save on your project, go file save, or refresh on your browser, we can see indeed this paragraph has had changed colors. That's the power of CSS. Any element we put this class into now will get those colors. So next, let's go ahead now and style this using the element. So we'll undo what we've done. CTRL and Z undoes. So here, again, we have the element h1. So we'll just go into our CSS file, and instead of the class.mycss, we'll just replace the class name with the element name, which is just h1, no dot. And once we click Save, CTRL and S or File Save, and refresh in our browser, we can see here the h1 did indeed get styled. And of course that means any other h1s on this page will also get the same styling, but we don't happen to have any other h1s on this page at the minute. Now for the last method, let's go ahead and use the ID selector. I'll just remove this for now. Now we go back into our h1 again. And we'll assign it an ID and call it whatever we want. So we type ID. We can see vscode. If we just hit enter, it will autocomplete. Let's just assign it an ID of my ID. Now, this element now has a particular ID, and if we set CSS for an ID called my ID, only this element will be styled. So we go back into our CSS file. And instead of h1, we're going to set this to, for an ID, we use the hash element and my ID. And we can see indeed it picked up the fact that this is styled with our ID of my ID. So just looking here at the HTML file, this is a unique ID for this h1. So if we had other h1s, they would not be affected by this. If we wanted to change all h1s, we just use the first thing we done, which is the class. So to get the files used in this example, the HTML reference project, just go to the GitHub link that's down in the description of this video. You can have a look at it here. So a GitHub repository is just a location on the internet hosted by a company called Git that most developers like to share or store their code in, either for their own use or to share with other developers. The repository on GitHub is just a folder used to store code or files, etc. Let's have a look at each folder. So when we're in the repository here, you can see the name of the repository there, actions along the top. You can see the main folder here, and there's a README file too. So if you want, you can just click onto the folders and see what's inside them and download the code from there. But to get all the code, you're going to go over here to the code button. We're going to click and download zip file. Once that's downloaded, go into your downloads folder. Then we need to extract it. So we're going to Windows, you're going to right click and extract all. Now let's just have a look at these files in VS Code. So we're going to go to our desktop. We're going to open up Visual Studio Code. And now we're going to open the folder that we just extracted. Open folder on the left. And we're going to go to Downloads. And here we are. And you can see here on the Explorer view on the left, there's the folder we can click to expand. And here's the reference project folder. And here's the HTML file, so we'll click on that, and there's the code. You can use this for reference or to rebuild your project if something goes wrong.